We all love a good adventure, but what happens when things take a turn for the worse? Today, we're diving into some of the most intense caving and cave diving disasters we've ever covered on this channel. If you're into thrilling adventures and real-life drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. On a cold Sunday morning, March 22, 1959, 8 adventurous cavers gathered at the entrance of Peak Cavern, a renowned cave system near Castleton in Derbyshire, England. Among the group was Oscar Hackett Neil Moss, a 20-year-old philosophy student from Balliol College, Oxford. Neil's heart raced with excitement as he prepared to dive into the depths of the cave. He was an enthusiastic explorer with a deep passion for uncovering the secrets hidden underground. Accompanying Neil were members of the British Speleological Association, seasoned cavers who shared his excitement for the upcoming adventure. Their mission was to explore a passage located about half a mile from the cave's entrance and investigate a fissure discovered in a side chamber 2 weeks earlier. This would be no easy task. The journey would take them roughly 1,000 feet below ground through a complex labyrinth of narrow, winding passages. Entering the cave, the cavers immediately faced their first challenge: the notorious Mucky Duck section. This was a tight, wet tunnel that often filled with water after rainfall, making it a tough squeeze even for experienced cavers. Despite the difficulties, the group pushed forward, navigating through the narrow passage with determination. Beyond the Mucky Duck lay the Boulder Passage, which was somewhat easier but still demanded careful negotiation around various obstacles. About 150 meters into the passage, the group encountered a 3-meter climb on the north wall of the upper gallery. Above them was Pickering Passage, an extended narrow crawl that required them to kneel and maneuver in tight spaces. This route ended with a tricky bend and a muddy sump above the eye hole, barely large enough for a person to pass through. Beyond this point, the passage led to the Stalagmite Chamber, now known as Moss Chamber, one of the most beautifully decorated chambers in the cave. Neil was thrilled to see the chamber and explore the mysterious tight shaft discovered earlier. After over an hour of intense crawling, elbowing, and climbing, the team reached their destination. Despite their exhaustion, they marveled at the natural beauty surrounding them. The fissure in the ground was large enough for an average person to pass through, measuring about 1 meter by 70 centimeters. Neil's curiosity was piqued as he wondered what lay beyond the passage. No one had fully explored the shaft, but they estimated its depth to be around 40 feet. The shaft descended slightly off vertical for 12 feet, followed by a challenging corkscrew twist, leading to a 10-foot-long inclined plane, and then a further vertical 18-foot drop. Around 3:30 p.m., the group lowered a flexible sided ladder designed for accessing confined spaces. Neil began his descent into the unknown, maneuvering and sliding down. He wasn't secured with a safety rope, as they believed the narrowness of the fissure would prevent him from falling. Shortly after starting his descent, he encountered an incredibly tight corkscrew compression. Despite the challenge, he navigated through it, feeling a sense of accomplishment. However, he wasn't aware of the difficulties ahead. Throughout his descent, Neil maintained constant communication with the team, assuring them that everything was going as planned. After successfully passing through the corkscrew twist, he continued his descent, but soon felt irregularities with his footing. Initially, he thought he could maneuver around them, as he had in the corkscrew section. After some time, he realized that a boulder was blocking his path. Understanding he couldn't dislodge the boulder or maneuver within the confined space, he decided to climb back up. Unfortunately, Neil found himself unable to lift his feet sufficiently to ascend the ladder. He became wedged in an elliptical crevice only 18 inches wide, unable to move in either direction. His cries for help echoed from the depths as he found himself trapped. Despite their efforts to lift Neil by pulling on the ladder, it became jammed between the cave surface and Neil's body. Situations like these are not uncommon in caving, and initially, Neil's companions thought rescue would be straightforward. However, several attempts to haul them up with ropes failed, with each rope snapping or shearing on the rock edge. This likely caused Neil to panic, and as he tried to climb upward, he became firmly stuck just below the corkscrew. Unable to bend his legs to grip the ladder or flex his elbows to ascend further, he found himself in a dire situation. Recognizing the urgency, some cavers went to seek additional help. Within hours, volunteers from across England arrived at Peak Cavern, determined to free the trapped Neil. Hundreds of volunteers, along with assistance from the Royal Air Force, police, and even the Navy, joined the rescue efforts. Just a few hours after Neil became trapped, the rescuers encountered another unforeseen problem. By this time, the atmosphere in the shaft had become severely polluted, with Neil's body cutting off the airflow. His disorientation became evident, and his behavior grew increasingly irrational. Experienced cavers were sent down the shaft to reach Neil, but one by one, they were forced back by the toxic air. 3 volunteers lost consciousness while attempting the descent. Finally, the 4th volunteer, Ron Peters, managed to secure a rope around Neil's chest. Upon starting to pull, they realized that this only worsened his breathing difficulties. News of Neil's predicament spread rapidly through nearby villages. Seasoned cavers, known for their bravery and resourcefulness, hurried to Peak Cavern with ropes, oxygen masks, and makeshift stretchers. They were determined to navigate the perilous shaft, but the descent was grueling. The narrow passage, scarcely wider than a shoulder, twisted and turned, triggering feelings of claustrophobia. The air, tainted with Neil's exhalations, assaulted their lungs and clouded their vision. One by one, they emerged defeated, gasping for fresh air, their eyes red and stinging. The Royal Air Force airlifted oxygen cylinders and specialized equipment to the scene. When a delivery of oxygen tanks arrived at 12:30 a.m., there was hope that it would revive Neil and facilitate his rescue. Although the air quality marginally improved, it remained insufficient. It was decided to continue pumping oxygen throughout the night, with plans to send in a nimble, experienced caver capable of navigating the narrow shaft first thing in the morning. By early Monday afternoon, nearly 24 hours since Neil had entered the cave, his labored breathing could still be heard. Despite the desperate situation, the team remained determined to persevere. Compressed air cylinders were used to try to clear the foul air from the shaft. The walls, ladder, and rope were coated in mud, obscuring Neil's location. All that could be seen was a muddy blockage far below, with Neil firmly jammed in an immovable position. Meanwhile, incessant rain threatened to flood the Mucky Ducks area of Peak Cavern. As a precaution, it was advised to withdraw for everyone's safety. Once the rain eased, accompanied by an raft doctor who had joined the rescue effort, they returned to the head of the shaft where they had last heard Neil breathing. But this time, there was no sound. Neil Moss was declared dead on Tuesday, March 24, 1959. Dr. Hugh Kidd described the experience as the first and only time he had declared death without actually seeing the patient. Throughout the ordeal, Neil's father, Eric Moss, waited at the tunnel entrance. He requested that his son's body be left in place to prevent anyone else from risking their lives. Contrary to popular belief, the lower part of the shaft was sealed with loose rocks collected from the chamber floor, not with concrete as often reported. The once well-decorated chamber that housed the tiny shaft eventually became Neil Moss's final resting place. Today, the stalagmite chamber is named Moss Chamber in memory of the courageous young caver who tragically lost his life. On Wednesday, August 17th, 5 friends decided to meet up for dinner. Their laughter and chatter filled the air, but soon, the conversation took an intriguing turn. During their meal, the conversation veered towards a local secret, a mysterious cave on the side of Lye Mountain, right next to the BYU campus. During their conversation, one of the girls, Jennifer Gilbraith, told her last experience in the cave. Her past experience had been harrowing. She became hypothermic and passed out inside the cave, But her adventurous spirit had not been dampened. This cave, known to some adventurous students as Gollum's Cave, was a point of fascination and intrigue. Just a year prior, 2 young cavers had fully surveyed it, but it remained a formidable challenge, known only to those brave enough to explore its hidden depths. Jennifer Gilbraith convinced her friends to schedule a trip into the cave, emphasizing that they will surely not be able to make it through the 15-foot tunnel to the other side of the cave. From the outside, Gollum's Cave didn't seem inviting. The entrance was partially submerged in a foot of water and required explorers to crouch through a narrow, nearly 100-foot tunnel. For most hikers, this would be an immediate deterrent, but for those in the know, the challenge of discovering what lay beyond was too alluring to resist. The real adventure began with a daunting task: navigating an 18 by 24-inch water-filled hole in the ground. Even seasoned explorers hesitated at this point, knowing that what awaited on the other side was a mix of excitement and danger. Determined to prove their courage, the friends decided to explore the cave that night. By the time they arrived at the cave, it was already 2 a.m. The darkness and early morning chill made the cave seem even more eerie. They sat outside for a while, gathering their courage before venturing into the shallow entrance. After a 15-minute-long debate of who should go first, Jennifer, having previously navigated the cave, took the lead. Her past experience had been harrowing. She became hypothermic and passed out inside the cave, but her adventurous spirit had not been dampened. Her confidence reassured the others. Blake, Scott, and Ariel decided to join her, while Joseph opted to wait outside the main cave, perhaps sensing the inherent risk involved in the exploration. With only a single flashlight between them, the 4 friends carefully approached the small opening in the cave floor. It was now 4:30 a.m., and the darkness outside was absolute. Jennifer took the plunge first, slipping into the cold, narrow passage. Her friends watched anxiously as she disappeared beneath the water, leaving only a small ripple behind. The tunnel was tight, no larger than a doorway, measuring just 2 feet wide and 4 feet high. One by one, Blake, Scott, and Ariel nervously followed Jennifer's lead, each taking a deep breath before submerging. Inside the cave, a rope tied to a rock in the main chamber guided the way through the tunnel, secured to a piece of wood in the inner cave. This rope, though seemingly trivial, was a vital lifeline. The rope helped the cavers to navigate through the difficult path, and if you would miss the rope, the probability of you navigating the hole would be negligible. Previous explorers also had warned how easy it was to miss the exit. Brian Lamprey, a seasoned caver, once recounted a harrowing moment when he overshot the exit and found himself trapped in a dead end. The seconds he spent finding his way out were a chilling brush with death. Thankfully, he was able to make his way out of the hole just before he gasped with lungs full of water. Despite these risks, Jennifer, Blake, Scott, and Ariel made the short swim to the inner cave, a small space just 15 feet away. The inner cave was slightly more spacious, about 6.5 feet tall with a peak of 9 feet, providing a small air pocket above the water. Inside the cave, the explorers were likely feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The initial relief of surfacing inside the inner chamber would have quickly given way to discomfort. The air inside was likely bad air, a term used in caving to describe air that lacks the normal oxygen levels. In a cave with stagnant air and a closed water source, carbon dioxide buildup was inevitable, a situation exacerbated by the burning of candles inside the cave. With no airflow, carbon dioxide settled at the water level, creating a hazardous environment. The explorers, unaware of the poor air quality, would have found their ability to think, move, and breathe gradually impaired. The hole was suspicious enough to only accommodate one person at a time. Therefore, realizing the urge to act rapidly, Jennifer attempted to exit first. While navigating her way out, she faced a dire situation as she struggled to find the exit hole. The low oxygen levels, around 10 to 12%, severely reduced her ability to hold her breath. With only about a minute before she would lose consciousness, panic set in. The murky water, stirred up by sediment, made it even harder to see, and she may have lost grip of the guiding rope. Her chances of finding the way out quickly became slim, turning an already desperate situation into a tragic one. Back in the inner cave, the others waited in the dark, not knowing Jennifer was fighting for her life. After a brief wait, Ariel was next to attempt the exit. The elevated carbon dioxide levels would have doubled her respiration rate. Taking deep breaths before diving, she swam forward, only to encounter Jennifer's body in the tunnel. The reality of feeling her friend's lifeless body in the confined space heightened the panic. The supposed clear passage now felt claustrophobic, with no room for two to navigate the tight opening. The narrow tunnel, once a path of adventure, turned into a nightmarish trap as she realized just how little space there was to maneuver through. Blake and Scott, having spent even more time in the bad air, would have faced similar difficulties. Blake plunged into the water-filled tunnel, only to be confronted by the lifeless bodies of Ariel and Jennifer. The chaos intensified as he struggled to understand what was happening. In the dim light, the narrow tunnel felt even more suffocating. Ariel was unconscious and on the brink of death, leaving Blake in a state of sheer panic and desperation. Scott, the last to attempt the exit, would have suffered the longest exposure to the bad air. In his weakened state, he might have quickly lost consciousness upon encountering the others. Meanwhile, Joseph waited outside, unsure how long his friends would stay. With no clear plan in place, his anxiety grew as minutes turned into hours. By 5:30 a.m., still no sign of his friends. Joseph ventured into the cave and peered into the watery hole, seeing no movement or light. Confused and worried, he called some friends familiar with the cave. When they couldn't help, he finally contacted the police at 6:25 a.m. Joseph could only wait anxiously as authorities arrived. Rescuers immediately began pumping air into the cave to restore oxygen levels, and pumped out water to create an airspace within the tunnel. After an hour of pumping, they discovered Jennifer's body floating inside the tunnel. Continuing their efforts, they found Ariel, Blake, and Scott together, all facing the exit hole. The evidence from the scene, Joseph's account, and the autopsies confirming drowning as the cause of death pointed to a tragic sequence of events. The poor air quality and cramped tunnel had claimed the lives of 4 young, healthy individuals. To prevent future tragedies, the cave entrance was sealed with concrete, ensuring that no other explorers would face the same fate. This final adventure began on a brisk Saturday morning, with Donald and his boys, Christopher and Roger, filled with anticipation. The crooked swamp cave system had always intrigued Donald, with its complex network of passages and chambers, each one offering a new challenge. Donald and his 2 boys were leading a scout group. The group members were excited too, though some were visibly nervous about the day ahead. However, Donald was not experiencing his first trip. He had always enjoyed leading the scout into many different mysterious caves. Besides Donald, another scoutmaster joined the trip. The group of 12 boys was a mix of eager and nervous scouts, each ready to face the claustrophobic conditions of the cave. As they gathered at the cave entrance, Donald and Jim laid down the ground rules once more. Safety was paramount. The boys were to stay close, always keep their buddy in sight, and only explore the areas the scoutmasters had cleared. The entrance to Crooked Swamp Cave was almost hidden, a small opening just 16 inches high and 28 inches wide. It was a test of courage for the scouts, many of whom had never faced such tight spaces before. As they squeezed through the entrance, initial anxiety turned into excitement and anticipation. Inside, they found themselves in a relatively spacious room, about 300 square feet, with ceilings between 8 and 11 feet high. Donald and Jim positioned themselves at opposite ends of the room, keeping a watchful eye on the boys as they explored the larger paths branching out from the main chamber. The main chamber pointed to different smaller tunnels, but both the scout leaders were unsure of the path to take, as any one of them could lead into a dead end. However, the boys were much smaller than the two men. Therefore, Donald was convinced that boys will easily make it through the tiniest of the paths. But stupid of his act, he didn't think it for himself. Donald eagerly decided to explore a smaller tunnel that branched off from the main room. Donald, standing at 5'11" and weighing 160 pounds, was familiar with tight squeezes in caves. His familiarity with caving gave him confidence as he slid into the 18 by 20-inch passage. The mud made the going slippery, but he managed to make steady progress. His sons kept close, ready to relay information back to the group. But as he maneuvered through a tight turn, Donald suddenly felt the ground give way beneath him. He slid into a narrow crevice, unable to stop his descent. Though the fall was only a few feet, Donald found himself wedged in a keyhole-shaped tunnel that narrowed to just 5 inches at the bottom. His arms were pinned at his sides, and every attempt to move only wedged him further into the crevice. He called out to his sons, instructing them to stop and stay calm. He tried to push himself out of the tunnel, but it was no use. Donald remained stuck. Donald asked Christopher to help him get out of the tunnel. He tried to grab the shoes of his father surrounded by mud, but due to confined space, he was left with no choice but to go and get some help. Christopher and Roger, realizing the severity of the situation, retreated to fetch Jim. Jim squeezed into the narrow passage and found Donald's legs protruding from the tight turn. The 30-degree angle made it nearly impossible to pull him out. Each tug only seemed to tighten the cave's grip. Rocks that had loosened during Donald's slide now blocked any backward movement. Hours passed with Donald still trapped. Jim and the boys couldn't free him, so they called for help. A specialized cave rescue team arrived, facing the daunting task of navigating the 18-inch wide tunnel. They quickly got to work, trying to rig up ropes to pull Donald out of the tight passage. However, despite the combined strength of several people, their efforts only wedged him further under the ledge and rock that trapped him. The rescuers couldn't reach the rock blocking the path, and Donald's hands were pinned by his body in the narrow fissure he had slid into. Realizing that pulling him free wasn't an option, they brought in chisels and small jackhammers to break apart the larger pieces of rock. This painstaking work in the cramped space yielded little progress, but they persisted, hoping to eventually free him. Rescuers managed to keep Donald as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. They used heat lamps and warm water bottles on his exposed legs, but the cold cave air and constant contact with the rock were relentless. The temperature inside the cave was a mere 57 degrees, and hypothermia was a real threat. Cavers with extensive knowledge of the system knew of another cave that connected to the tunnel near where Donald was trapped. They entered this cave from the opposite side and explored until they found a passage leading directly to the tiny tunnel. However, only the smallest cavers could navigate this narrow passage. Two sisters, Lynn and Nancy Taylor, were perfect for the task. Nancy, at 5'2" and 105 pounds, and Lynn, at 5 feet and 86 pounds, had the advantage of their petite size. Lynn, using her tiny frame, managed to wiggle through the extremely narrow passages in the second cave. She reached the point where the caves connected, but it was only 5 inches wide at that spot. Despite stretching as far as she could, Lynn was unable to reach Donald's head. The cramped, winding passage kept her about 2 feet away from him. Heartbroken, they realized that rescuing Donald from that side was impossible, leaving the rescue team unable to provide him with warm water or nourishment. Time was running out, so they called in a specialized rescue team. This new team began digging with the hope of breaking through to the section of the tunnel where Donald was trapped. They worked tirelessly throughout Sunday, trying to reach the right depth. However, by the end of the day, they were still about 12 feet away from the target tunnel. They continued to dig laterally, attempting to find a way to connect to the passage. By Sunday night, Donald had been trapped for 36 hours in a downward angled position. With each passing hour, Donald's condition deteriorated. He grew colder and more disoriented. The rescuers, undeterred, kept digging in hopes of reaching him from another angle. By Monday morning, nearly 48 hours after he had become trapped, the rescuers heard faint grunts from Donald. It was a sign that he was still alive, although suffering from severe hypothermia. This discovery fueled the team's determination to dig even faster and more efficiently. The situation again shifted to terror when they were hit with a challenging bedrock area that was almost impossible to dig through. With nearly 2 days of entrapment, no food, no water, and the relentless cold, the rescuers began to fear for Donald's survival. The nurse used a Doppler machine and EKG to check for signs of life, but found no pulse in Donald's legs. Despite this, the team continued their efforts, refusing to give up hope. They resorted to using dynamite, a risky but necessary measure. Finally, on Tuesday morning, after nearly 72 hours, a doctor reached Donald and confirmed the worst. He had succumbed to hypothermia and exposure. The heroic efforts of the rescue team had not been enough. The nature of the accident and the cave's unforgiving terrain had sealed Donald's fate. Recovering Donald's body was a grueling task that took another day. The tight passages and jagged rocks made it a challenging operation, but the team persisted. Donald's death left a profound impact on everyone involved. The crooked swamp cave system was locked for limited access, with entry restricted to experienced cavers who were members of recognized organizations.
5th, 1999, a lively and adventurous 21-year-old named Robert Kennedy from Moggy, Oklahoma, embarked on an overnight camping trip with his stepbrother Richard Steeler Jr. and their friend Ben Keegley from Tulsa. Their destination was the enigmatic limestone enclave of Hermit Cave, a remote site nestled along the eastern shore of Fort Gibson Lake in eastern Oklahoma. Under a vast, starry Oklahoma sky, the trio arrived, with the tranquil beauty of the night setting the perfect stage for their adventure. They set up camp and lit a roaring campfire, its flames casting flickering shadows on the surrounding rocks. The night was filled with lively conversations, recounting tales and legends rich with the history and folklore of the region. Hermit Cave, in particular, captivated their imaginations. Though well known among locals, its labyrinthine passages remained largely uncharted, adding to its mystique. Robert, having visited the cave before, was familiar with its main passage, often deemed mundane by many explorers. However, his curiosity was sparked by whispers of hidden side passages, said to reveal stunning gypsum formations and other natural wonders. As they sat by the campfire, warmed by its heat against the night's chill, an eerie sense of foreboding crept over them, adding a thrilling edge to their evening. Eventually, lulled by the crackling fire and the enchanting stories, they drifted off to sleep. The following morning, they woke to the serene sounds of nature and enjoyed a leisurely breakfast. The peaceful morning felt worlds away from the previous night's excitement. As they packed up their gear, the allure of Hermit Cave still lingered in Robert's mind. The captivating tales of hidden wonders ignited a spark of adventure in him, leading him to suggest a detour to explore the cave before heading home. Ben was enthusiastic but had an early work shift, leaving Robert and Richard to make a difficult decision. The golden rule of caving dictates that a party should never venture into a cave with fewer than 3 people, ensuring that if one person encounters trouble, another can stay while the third goes for help. Despite understanding the risks, Robert and Richard, driven by a sense of adventure, decided to take the chance. Clad casually in jeans and t-shirts and armed with only a single flashlight, they made their way toward Hermit Cave. The cave's spacious entrance allowed easy access, and they soon found themselves enveloped in its cool, damp air. The light from their solitary flashlight cast long, eerie shadows on the rock walls as they navigated the main passage. They marveled at the natural rock formations despite the slippery and dim conditions, the cave's mysterious ambience adding to their excitement. As they made their way back toward the entrance, Robert's keen eye caught sight of one of the rumored side passages. Its intricate layout and narrow confines intrigued him, filling him with eager anticipation. Driven by curiosity and a thirst for discovery, Robert felt compelled to explore the side passage. He assured Richard, who agreed to wait outside with the flashlight, that he wouldn't venture too far. The side passage was a challenging 150-foot stretch filled with numerous twists and turns, requiring a special technique to navigate through the cramped limestone tunnels. With determination, Robert squeezed through a keyhole-shaped formation, feeling a rush of accomplishment. Unbeknownst to him, this narrow point would be impossible to pass feet first on his return. As he advanced, the passage became increasingly narrower, prompting him to reconsider. He attempted to crawl backward but found it impossible. Hoping to find an opening to turn around, he encountered an hourglass-shaped passage with a 30 degrees downward angle. Exhausted and running out of options, Robert squeezed into the opening, exhaling to pass through. He soon found himself hopelessly stuck, his torso wedged tightly between the rock walls, one arm pinned beneath him, the other pushed back by a rock outcropping. Despite his desperate efforts, gravity worked against him, and his struggles only worsened his predicament. Panicking, he called out for Richard's help. The exact time it took for Richard to enter the cave is unclear, but eventually he ventured in, guided by the faint light from the entrance. Hearing Richard's voice gave Robert hope. However, Richard quickly realized he couldn't assist without proper light and told Robert he needed to get help. After what felt like an eternity, a team of 10 rescuers arrived, pooling their expertise to devise a rescue plan. The 150-foot distance between Robert and the main passage posed a significant challenge, allowing only one rescuer to reach him at a time. Breathing difficulties due to the cave's conditions prompted the use of a ventilation system to circulate warmed air. Realizing drilling a shaft was not feasible, they used manual tools to widen the keyhole compression. Despite their efforts, time was running out, and the line between life and death grew increasingly thin. Exhausted but undeterred, the rescuers rotated shifts to conserve energy. Hours ticked by, and one rescuer noticed Robert's condition deteriorating, signs of potential suffocation becoming evident. After widening the keyhole crevice, a rescuer reached Robert's feet. Although Kennedy was unresponsive, a faint pulse in his legs provided hope. However, pulling him out by his feet proved futile due to the lack of leverage. The team decided to dig around Robert's body, painstakingly widening the hourglass compression. The tightness around his torso prevented them from even passing water, making the situation increasingly dire. After a grueling 5-hour operation, Robert was finally freed and brought back to the cave entrance. Paramedics were ready to assess his vital signs and transport him to the hospital, but it was too late. No signs of life were found. A combination of suffocation from chest compression and low oxygen levels led to his rapid loss of consciousness and eventual death. Robert's first and final cave exploration turned into a tragic struggle for survival, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers within uncharted territories. This tragic event etched itself into local history, underscoring the importance of adhering to safety guidelines and respecting the unpredictable nature of cave exploration.
On February 12, 2011, with winter still gripping the land with an icy chill, 10 students from the University of Florida embarked on what they believed would be an exhilarating caving expedition. The group, composed of 5 boys and 5 girls, was led by 20-year-old Grant Lackenbach, who was eagerly anticipating his upcoming birthday. Among the group was Michael, Grant's close friend and fellow adventurer. The two shared a bond forged through their academic pursuits, Christian faith, and love for thrilling activities such as rock climbing, skydiving, wake surfing, and caving. Their destination was Ellison's Cave, located in Walker County on Pigeon Mountain, Georgia. Known for its depth and challenging terrain, Ellison's Cave is the 12th deepest cave in the United States and features the fantastic pit, the deepest unobstructed pit in the country, nearly twice as tall as the Statue of Liberty. The students were undeterred by the cave's reputation. confident in their skills and excited for another adventure. The group departed on February 11th, traveling over 400 miles to reach Georgia. They arrived in the afternoon and checked into a hotel near the wildlife management area where Pigeon Mountain is located. Excitement buzzed in the air as they prepared for the next day's expedition, discussing their plans and double-checking their gear. On the morning of February 12th, the students dressed in casual clothing, packed their caving equipment, and left their phones behind, believing they wouldn't need them. They underestimated the severity of the cold and the potential dangers they might face. As they ascended the mountain, the temperature continued to drop, but their excitement kept them moving forward. Grant and Michael, seasoned adventurers, reassured their friends that everything would be fine. After nearly an hour of hiking, they reached one of the cave's narrow entrances. The opening was small and jagged, allowing only one person to pass through at a time. Despite its intimidating appearance, the darkness beyond beckoned to them, promising the thrill of exploration. One by one, they squeezed through the entrance, their headlamps cutting through the darkness. Inside, the cave revealed an otherworldly beauty. Stalactites and stalagmites adorned the cavern, and the walls sparkled with mineral deposits. However, the biting cold was a constant reminder of the cave's harsh conditions. In summer, the cave's temperature hovers around 56 degrees Fahrenheit, but in winter it felt like an icy tomb. The group decided to limit their exploration to a small section of the cave to avoid the worst of the cold. Their plans were abruptly disrupted when one student's backpack slipped and fell into the warm-up pit, a vertical drop of 125 feet. Although not as deep as the fantastic pit, it was still a significant and dangerous descent, especially given the freezing conditions exacerbated by a nearby waterfall. The backpack contained vital supplies, and the group felt retrieving it was necessary. Grant, as the leader, volunteered to go after the backpack. His friends urged him to reconsider, sensing the potential danger, but he insisted he would be fine. Determined, he began his descent into the pit, using a rope to lower himself into the abyss. As Grant descended, the cold grew increasingly intense. His shivering became more pronounced, but he pressed on, encouraged by the voices of his friends above. The sound of the waterfall grew louder, a constant reminder of the treacherous conditions. Halfway down, he encountered the full force of the waterfall, which drenched him in icy water. The shock of the freezing water caused him to lose control, and his harness and rope malfunctioned, leaving him entangled and unable to move. Panic set in as Grant struggled to free himself. His screams for help were drowned out by the roar of the waterfall, but his friends heard his faint cries and called back, urging him to stay calm. Michael, without hesitation, strapped himself to the same rope and began his descent to rescue Grant. Michael reached Grant, who was by now nearly incapacitated by the cold. He was shivering uncontrollably, his movements slow and his words incoherent. Michael tried to free Grant, but he too became entangled and was soaked by the freezing water. Both were now trapped, unable to move up or down the rope. Above, the rest of the group was frantic. Some stayed to provide encouragement while others hurried out of the cave to seek help. They retrieved their phones and contacted the authorities at 2:19 p.m., explaining the dire situation. In the cave, the voices of Michael and Grant grew weaker as the cold sapped their strength. Their friends above continued to shout words of encouragement, but their efforts seemed in vain. The cold was relentless, draining the boys' energy and slowing their heart rates. As the reality of the situation began to set in, the group above grappled with a mixture of hope and dread. Time seemed to stretch interminably as they waited for the rescue team, their hearts pounding with each passing minute. The rescue team arrived swiftly, treating the remaining students for hypothermia before descending into the pit. The students who had stayed behind described the exact location and conditions within the cave, emphasizing the urgency. The rescue operation was complex and fraught with challenges. The team, equipped with advanced gear and experienced in cave rescues, descended into the pit with determination. The environment inside the cave was hostile, with temperatures continuing to drop and the waterfall's roar making communication difficult. Despite these obstacles, the rescuers moved methodically, prioritizing safety while working as swiftly as possible. By 3:30 p.m., as the rescuers reached Michael and Grant, they found the two friends entangled in a grim embrace of survival. The scene was haunting. The icy water had taken its toll, and both boys were unresponsive. The rescuers checked for pulses but found none, a confirmation of the worst fears held by those above. The extraction process was painstaking. Untangling the ropes and carefully lifting the boys without causing further entanglements required precision and strength. The rescuers worked tirelessly, their breath visible in the frigid air, as the hours wore on. When they finally emerged from the pit, carrying the lifeless bodies of Michael and Grant, the scene above erupted in grief. Friends collapsed in tears, their sobs echoing off the cave walls. In the aftermath, the surviving students were treated for hypothermia and shock. Counselors and university officials arrived to provide support, but the emotional wounds were deep. The loss of Grant and Michael left a void that would be felt long after the immediate horror had faded. Their story became a powerful testament to the unpredictability of nature and the limits of human endurance. On September 9, 1990, Mark Healy checked into a YMCA hostel in Melbourne. He told his family he was heading out for a skiing trip to clear his mind. But in truth, Healy had a different plan. A plan that would end in tragedy. Healy had two loves in life: the thrill of adventure and the joy of teaching. Every chance he got, he was out exploring. Australia was his favorite destination, and he had embarked on countless expeditions across Tasmania and Western Australia. Whether he was skiing down snowy slopes, navigating through caves, or hiking along rugged trails, Healy lived for the excitement of the great outdoors. Over the years, he honed his skills and became quite the expert, always seeking the next adrenaline rush and the beauty of uncharted territories. But just as much as he loved his adventures, Healy was passionate about teaching. He often said that educating young minds was his true calling. His dedication to his students was evident in everything he did. He believed in the power of education and inspiring the next generation. So, when the school where he taught announced a special excursion to encourage students to embrace adventure, Healy was over the moon. The cherry on top was when he was selected to lead the trip. It was the perfect blend of his two great loves: adventure and teaching. He couldn't have been more excited, not knowing the dark twist this journey would take. The students were told this trip wasn't for those with weak hearts. The itinerary included rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and cave exploration. Despite the stern warning, many students eagerly signed up. They were drawn to the thrill and the promise of a memorable experience. One of the places they planned to explore was the Mystery Creek Cave, nestled within Southwest National Park. Although ideal for beginner cavers, it was not without its risks. There were hidden dangers, and a lack of caution could turn a thrilling adventure into a deadly one. Nonetheless, with his extensive experience, Healy felt confident in his ability to lead the students safely through the cave. On the morning of July 2, 1990, 19 students eagerly gathered for the expedition. They were buzzing with excitement, chatting about the adventure that awaited them. 8 of them were particularly excited about the cave exploration. They had heard stories about the cave's beauty and were eager to see it for themselves. Knowing the potential risks, Healy enlisted the help of another teacher, Joanne, and a seasoned colleague, Danielle. He wanted to ensure that the students were well supervised and safe at all times. By noon, the group was on their way, ready for an adventure despite the gloomy, rainy weather. They were well prepared with sturdy boots, helmets, and wetsuits, ensuring they could handle the challenges ahead. As they approached the entrance to Mystery Creek Cave, they met a man who had just exited. He was drenched and looked weary. He warned them that the cave was flooded up to his boots due to the heavy rain and suggested they come back another day. He shared his concern about the rising water levels and the potential danger, but Healy, confident in his expertise, decided to proceed. He believed he could guide the students through the cave safely. He had faced challenging conditions before and trusted his skills and judgment. Inside, the cave was even more breathtaking than they had imagined. The walls were adorned with glowworms, casting a magical, luminous ambience. However, they soon encountered rising water levels. To cross safely, Healy demonstrated a clever technique he had learned from his many expeditions. They would form a human chain with the strongest students at each end and Healy in the middle. Where the water was deepest, those not in the chain would hold onto it as they crossed. This method worked perfectly, and the students found it both effective and enjoyable, eager to use it again. By 4:30 p.m., they reached a narrow section known as the Matchbox Squeeze. This part of the cave was notoriously tight, requiring them to wriggle through to continue on their path. It was a challenge, but they were up for it. On the other side, they moved towards the cave entrance via the laundry chute. As they progressed, Healy noticed the sound of water was getting louder, indicating rising pressure. The noise of the flowing water echoed through the cave, creating an ominous soundtrack to their journey. He decided they needed to use the human chain technique again to cross safely. The students enthusiastically formed the chain, but this time, the water was up to Healy's knees, and the current was stronger. They began crossing, but the first student, a petite girl, almost fell due to the current. Healy caught her just in time, and she made it across safely. His heart raced with concern, but he kept calm to avoid alarming the students. He knew that if he showed fear, it would only increase their anxiety. The next student started crossing, encouraged by Healy and the others. They cheered her on, providing words of encouragement and support. Just as she was about to reach the other side, the current pulled her down. She screamed for help, and Healy knew he had to act quickly. Her friend and one of the teachers, Joanne, rushed to save her, but the current pulled them too. The situation was becoming increasingly dire. Healy realized he needed to get the remaining students to safety first. He couldn't afford to lose any more time. He led them out of the cave quickly, urging them to stay close and move swiftly. The rain had made the ground slippery, and they had to be careful with each step. Once the students were safe, he returned to search for the missing three. Hours passed with no sign of them. Authorities arrived, finding Healy devastated. The three victims were later found, but it was too late. The cave had claimed their lives. Despite the tragedy, Healy was hailed as a hero. People praised his efforts, acknowledging the bravery and dedication he had shown. He had done everything in his power to ensure the safety of the students. But Healy couldn't shake the guilt. He felt responsible, believing he could have done more to prevent the loss. The weight of the tragedy pressed heavily on him, haunting his every thought. 2 months later, unable to cope with the pain, Healy packed some gear and told his family he was going skiing. They wished him well, unaware of the turmoil he was facing. He checked into the YMCA hostel in Melbourne. In a moment of despair, he climbed to the 10th floor and ended his life. The loss of Healy was a devastating blow to those who knew him. He had been a source of inspiration and strength, and his absence left a void that could never be filled.
Morris Baetzold was a vibrant young boy until 1955, when his whole world came crashing down. His parents' divorce left him and his brother Donald to navigate a turbulent childhood filled with uncertainty and instability. Without a solid parental figure, they were shuffled from one foster home to another, facing the harsh realities of a fragmented family life. Eventually, they found some semblance of stability at a Methodist children's home. However, the lack of a stable family environment left Morris seeking solace elsewhere. He found it in a hidden refuge, a nearby cave known as Wildcat Cave. Wildcat Cave, perched in the red sandstone walls about 15 feet above a dry stream bed, was both thrilling and perilous. The cave's entrance started as a manageable 4-foot-high opening but quickly narrowed into tight, crawling passages. Despite its dangers, Morris was drawn to its quiet seclusion. It became his escape, a place where he could be alone with his thoughts. He visited the cave frequently, although he never ventured too far, aware of the risks it posed. He had once gotten lost in its dark, winding passages, but his friends had managed to find and rescue him just in time. On October 5, 1965, a group of children from the Methodist foster home, including Morris, set out on a bus trip to a nearby village. The anticipation was high, and the kids were excited for the adventure ahead. Unfortunately, a flat tire forced a change of plans, redirecting them to Wildcat Cave. The unexpected detour was met with enthusiasm by Morris and his friends, who saw it as an opportunity to explore the cave more thoroughly than ever before. As the group ventured further into the cave, the thrill of exploration gripped them. The cave's mysterious allure beckoned them deeper into its depths. However, in the midst of their excitement, Morris became separated from his friends. Panic set in as he realized he was alone in the labyrinth of narrow passages. He called out for help, but the thick rock walls swallowed his cries. Determined to find his way back, he began retracing his steps, only to become more disoriented. Meanwhile, Morris's friends had exited the cave, assuming he had done so before them. They only realized he was missing when they regrouped outside. Inside the cave, Morris faced mounting terror. He took a wrong turn down a slippery passage that grew increasingly narrow. He found himself in a tight crevice, wedged between the rock walls. Panic and claustrophobia gripped him as he struggled to free himself, only to become more tightly stuck. Hours passed before Morris's absence was noticed by the teachers and his friends. William Powell, one of the teachers, led a rescue effort into the cave. Smaller in stature, Powell managed to reach Morris and attempted to calm him. Morris could barely speak, his face pressed against the cold rock. Using a belt, Powell tried to pull Morris free, but the belt snapped, worsening the situation as Morris's face collided painfully with the rock. Realizing the severity of the situation, Powell called for professional rescuers. Fire Chief Paul Codera and his team arrived quickly, but their initial attempts to use hooks to free Morris proved futile. The narrow, twisting passages of the cave presented significant challenges, and drilling through the rock risked causing a cave-in. As the night wore on, hopes of a quick rescue dimmed. News of Morris's plight spread quickly, capturing national attention. Volunteers and professionals alike flocked to the scene, offering their help. Among them was Evelyn Pinky Petit, a small but determined nurse who managed to wriggle close enough to comfort Morris, although she couldn't reach him. Experienced caver Terry Brown devised a pulley system to try to extract Morris, but it only moved him a few inches at a time. The situation grew more dire as hours turned into a full day. Morris had been trapped for over 24 hours without food or water. His strength was waning, and rescuers feared he would lose consciousness, which would make it nearly impossible to save him. Desperate for a solution, they sought out anyone small and brave enough to reach Morris and assist in the rescue. Enter Michael Urey, an Eagle Scout of similar build to Morris, who volunteered to crawl into the cave. With a new plan in place, Michael was to loop ropes around Morris and apply a glycerin solution to make him slippery. Michael navigated the tight passages and managed to reach Morris, tying ropes around his ankles and legs. With coordinated efforts from above and below, they began the painstaking process of pulling Morris free. Despite several slips and setbacks, their determination paid off. After a grueling and tense effort, Morris finally broke free from the crevice. Cheers erupted from the gathered crowd as he was carefully wrapped in a blanket and carried out of the cave, more than 24 hours after he had first become trapped. Spectators applauded as Morris was loaded into an ambulance, exhausted but alive. Morris was treated for exhaustion, cuts, bruises, and a significant bruise on his cheek. The ordeal had been harrowing, but he had survived, thanks to the tireless efforts of rescuers and volunteers. The cave was later sealed shut to prevent any future tragedies, a stark reminder of the dangers it held. Morris Baetzold's story is one of resilience, bravery, and the extraordinary efforts of a community coming together to save a young life. It serves as a powerful testament to the human spirit and the lengths to which people will go to help those in need. The traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Morris, but it also highlighted the importance of hope and perseverance in the face of adversity. After his rescue, Morris tried to return to a semblance of normal life. The physical and emotional scars took time to heal, but the support of his brother, friends, and the community helped him recover. He found solace in sharing his story, using his experience to inspire others facing their own challenges. His story became a symbol of hope, demonstrating that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for rescue and redemption.
Let us know what would you do in situations just like this in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic videos.